I am from Lehigh University. I'm the co-author of a study on media coverage about nanotechnology's risks. Let me tell you a little bit about me before I get started. I've been studying media coverage of risks for longer than I care to remember, including radiation, nuclear accidents, EMF, as a matter of fact, dioxin and others, and I also study risk communication, and particularly related to nuclear activities, nuclear weapon sites, nuclear waste sites, and I've done that primarily through committees of the National Research Council. So I've got a fair background in risk communication and a fairly good background in covering media for many a year and seeing what they've been doing with lots of different topics. Nanotechnology really started to interest me because I was just intrigued by the possibilities, the nanomiracles that I kept reading about, and I kept thinking, well, if there are nanomiracles and all these promises, are there going to be nanoperils as well? And my risk antenna started rising quickly, and I started to think, well, maybe there is a project here that we'd like to take a look at. I should say that our project at Lehigh is supported by the National Science Foundation and the state of Pennsylvania, and I'd like to thank them for doing that. Let me start off by quoting a senator from Oregon. And he said this to a forum of the Nano Business Alliance. He said, if I had to pick the #1 challenge facing nanotechnology firms, it's environmental, health, and safety regulation, and the question of public perception. I thought that was kind of interesting. That was done in 2006, and I thought that was quite interesting that he said it at that point because having a government person who is not within NNI, but someone else, a congressman, senator, looking at that was an interesting kind of thing. I am not going to talk very much about risk perception. In fact, I'm going to talk nothing about risk perception because you've heard a lot about it in the last day or so, and I was delighted to sit in on part of that and listen to the presentations, as well as listen to the toxicologists this morning, which was interesting, and so on. But one of the things that has been with nanotechnology from almost the beginning, from the government end of things, has been this concern by government officials and industry officials about how the public would respond to nanotechnology. And in particular, there has been a great worry that hasn't been stated very often, but there's been this great worry that there's going to be some horror story in the media about a nanotech project, and that is going to taint the entire industry. That's giving an awful lot of power to the mass media, but sometimes those kinds of things happen. So when you look at the media coverage, you're looking at some information that could affect public trust in a number of different ways, and it depends on many factors that I'm not going to get into. But one of the factors is primarily how much information people do have about nanotechnology. So we're going to put up the title slide and very quickly, and there it is, and, and then we'll go to the next one. The next one is about people knowing very little about nanotechnology, and again, we've heard a lot about that from it's coming. There it is. From people yesterday. Just a few things here. I mean, we heard about it as early as 2004 in the report from the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK. One of the reasons I'm going to be talking about the UK is we are doing a comparative study between the United States and the UK media. And then one of the latest ones, sponsored by the Project on Emerging Nanotechnologies by HART, is that 71% of the people they had talked to had heard nothing or only very little about nanotechnology. In the fine print of that study, they said that the people who heard the least were women, older Americans, individuals with less education and lower income. I think Dietram talked about that yesterday. But they also said that these people said their most frequent information sources were news programs and newspapers about nanotechnology. which I found pretty interesting given our findings. So information in the media, as much as we may like it or dislike it, does have, is important in many ways in helping to build people's knowledge and perhaps lead to some trust or distrust in nanotechnology. We did newspaper content analysis, and what that means is that we look at the content of articles systematically using coders and groups of coders, and then try and figure out what the consistencies are and come up with quantitative data. You might say, well, given all of this discussion about the various media, newspapers are not becoming very important anymore, so why in the world are you looking at them? Well, first of all, they're easy to look at thanks to Nexus, but that's not the most important thing. When we first started this study, which was in 2004, there was very little coverage on television at all, and even less on radio about it, and we have some folks in Canada who helped us give us some information on that. And in addition, we did not very purposely go to the web to look at this information. And the reason we did that was we wanted to see what information people could come across just as they wandered through their newspapers or their daily lives about nanotechnology, rather than go and seek it out. Because what we're seeing from the lack of knowledge here is that people are not actively seeking out this information. Maybe they're not reading the newspaper articles either, but we still thought at this point in 2004 that newspapers were probably a main channel where people, normal everyday people who read newspapers, perhaps older, not college students, but others, would get information about nanotechnology. In addition, there had been some studies published of newspaper coverage, about 3 or 4 of them, early newspaper coverage that had been glowing in how positive the coverage was by Farber and Lewinstein and Stevens, talking about various kinds of frames and how positive everything was. And so we decided, well, if anything is going to affect a trust issue, it's probably going to be negative frames related to risks of some sort or another. So we decided to look at probably the potential for the most negative frames, and that was environmental and health risk. So what we tried to do, as this slide says, is we tried to find out how many articles there were in the U.S. and the U.K., and I'll explain why the 2 countries in a minute, how the coverage has changed over time, and that's what a longitudinal study is all about, and what potential environmental, health, and societal risks have been covered, and what regulatory issues have been discussed. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We actually found several patterns in the data that we have so far. Now, I should say that this is a longitudinal study, so we're presenting data from 7 years worth of study, but we're still going on. We're in the midst of analyzing our 2007 data. We're in the midst of coding our 2008 data. And so with longitudinal studies, they never seem to end, but eventually they will, because our funding will run out. So this will be, I don't know how many years, but soon enough. We found 3 major patterns for this period of time, and that is a continuing increase in the number of articles that discuss nanotechnology risks, which we'll show you in a minute, a continuing increase in the number of articles that discuss, in particular, environmental, health, and societal risks, and a rise in regulatory issues as topics in the media. I will briefly talk a little bit about coverage of uncertainty and coverage of GMOs. I will not talk at all about our work on information sources, which is ongoing and under analysis, and we hope to present some of that toward the end of the year. Okay, so we have 1,200 articles that we got from Lexis, and all the articles you get aren't always relative, even though you use lots of keywords, and those are the